Okay, good. All right. I'm Shel Horowitz from goingbeyondsustainability.com, and this talk is called Making Kindness Profitable. And this, don't worry about copying that because I will leave it up at the end of my talk as well. But that's how you can get a copy of the slides. That's how you can book a meeting with me to change the world through their kindness. On the left, you see Rosa Parks being booked after she was arrested on the bus. On the right, of course, Gandhi. That's Nelson Mandela on the left, and Emma Gonzalez on the right, gun safety activist and survivor of the Parkland shooting, an activist in her teens. So one of the things that I want to focus on that's different in this era of 2020 and 21 is that the pandemic has changed everything. And what that means is that for years we've been saying, oh, this is too hard. We can't possibly do it. It's too big a pivot. Well, in the last year, we have learned that everything can pivot with the right incentive. And staving off tens of thousands of deaths is certainly an incentive. So now that everything is open to question, I think a door has swung, that we don't have to look at going back to 2019 or even 2015. But we can look at going forward to a new and better world. So, for example, we can rethink education, we can rethink healthcare, we can rethink social and economic and climate justice in every sector. So here, for example, this is obviously a direct response to the pandemic. If you think about what life is like for people with hearing disabilities when everybody's wearing a mask, this solves that problem. Or it partially solves that problem. What it means is that the person with the hearing disability is probably still going to have to carry around a bunch of these and hand them out to anybody that wants to talk to them. So we're not quite all the way there yet, but it's a big step forward because the mouth is completely visible. And without the mouth being visible, that deaf person is essentially in a padded room by themselves. This is a kindness to urbanites who want fresh food. This is a vertical garden you can stick in a corner of your apartment. Don't need to have acres of land in order to grow your vegetables. This is a shot of the manufacturing line at a company called Grayston Bakery in Yonkers, New York. They have the best hiring policy I have ever heard of. And it goes like this. You want a job at Grayston, you put your name on the list. When your name is next on the list, you get offered a job. End of story, except not really end of story because you also get offered the training you need to be successful at that job. But you could be an ex-addict, an ex-felon, an ex-mental patient, a person without a home, whatever it is. That is not a barrier to being hired there. And what happens, of course, is that people are phenomenally loyal, so they make great employees because these people will give them a job when nobody else will. They work there a few years and either they get promoted up as a manager or they now have something decent to put on their resume. And this company, incidentally, makes brownies for Ben & Jerry's. Anything that you buy from Ben & Jerry's that's got a brownie in it was made at this plant. They also serve a lot of very fancy hotels in the Northeast with brownies and cookies. So it's a business success story. It's a social enterprise success story. It's a huge model for how to structure a manufacturing environment to favor those who need favoring, who have not had the leg up before. And I'd love to see more companies doing stuff like that. So who says dolls have to be white and female? If you're a child of color and who happens to have a Y chromosome, here are dolls that look like you. This little thing is called the kangaroo. It never went into production. This was a prototype. But oh my goodness, here you have a little electric vehicle. So it's green. It has a very low carbon footprint. A person who is dealing with a mobility disability can simply roll in through the tailgate, strap themselves in, lower the tailgate, and off they go. No need to wait 5 hours for the paratransit van. No need to wait 2 hours to get 20 minutes away because other people are being dropped off and picked up along the way. No need to schedule that appointment days ahead. You just get in your car and go like the rest of us. So it's an empowerment device. And I think empowerment in general is a framework for kindness. This happens to be my daughter's food blog. It's called thesmilingonion.com. And she has food sensitivities. She's also a lifelong vegetarian. So she has done a food blog for many years in which every recipe is both vegetarian and gluten-free. And also the ones of the last 2 or 3 years are all low FODMAP, which is something she has to deal with. But there are also all these other options. If you're looking for a creative recipe, you can search by all of these things that you see on the right and find exactly the recipe you want. Plus, she's a really fun writer. I will actually, afterwards, I'll put her URL in the chat. It's thesmilingonion.com. I don't want to get out of the presentation to do that. Okay, here are 2 examples of how kindness can be monetized. Of course, on the left, we have Oprah, who made kindness into almost a religion. And then it wasn't Mr. Rogers who monetized his kindness, but it was public broadcasting system. And there's merchandise and everything else. He was just a modest, humble man, and he didn't really care that much, I think, about monetizing. But other people have been able to come in on his brand. So this is what we call a virtuous circle. You'll see a few of these in the presentation. You can jump in anywhere on this circle and just keep going around clockwise. So, for example, if you have good revenue and profit, good media coverage, those lead to new markets. The social initiatives you're doing keep your staff morale very high, as well as your customer interest very high. It is easy to form partnerships, and partnerships are one of my favorite ways to market. It is easy to build community, and that in turn leads back to more revenue and profit. This is advice you will hear sometimes. I apologize that the top of the slide is too high. Oh, there. Nope, oops. Went back to the last slide. All right. But basically, if people tell you, forget it, you can't do this, they'll tell you it won't work here. We already talked about how the pandemic changes that. They talk about how you have to do the Milton Friedman thing and only care about the bottom line. That's nonsense. And incidentally, companies that do care about more than the bottom line tend to have a very good bottom line. They'll tell you to go start a nonprofit or work through charity and let your business be business and let your charity be charity. And to use Emma Gonzalez's phrase, I call BS. We know better. We know about the golden rule, do unto others as they would do unto you. We know about the platinum rule, do unto others as they would like you to do to them. We understand the multiple benefits of a higher purpose, that you can make a difference and a profit. I would submit that it's actually easier. And because it's easier, you can win over the bean counters. And if you win over the bean counters when there's a recession or a crisis, if your programs are self-supporting and generating income as opposed to being charity on the side, they're going to survive the recession. They're going to survive corporate pressure to get rid of them, because there won't be corporate pressure to get rid of a profit center that happens to be doing something about hunger or poverty or racism or climate change, and so on. So, but that all involves making in social good right from the beginning. And this is something that existing businesses can retrofit. But if you start with an idea that your business is going to be good for the world, it's just much, much easier. Companies that have done that include Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's. There's a lot of famous examples. So charity, the slide about the negatives talked about how some people are going to tell you should only do this for charity, but charities have their problems too. One of the problems is if you're a bad business doing good things with your philanthropy, you'll be seen as a bad business. And particularly people of my kids' generation, born in the 1980s and 90s, they're not going to do business with you if they don't trust your company. They want it built there and not thrown in as icing. And of course, it's very difficult to get a sense of what charities are really good to work with and what are not. And yes, I know about stuff like Charity Navigator, but there's always many questions afterwards. You also don't have to start a nonprofit. For-profit businesses, here are 6 reasons why they might be a better fit. And one of those is that you can actually find nonprofits to partner with who have the subject expertise that you want, and you might have the reach and the resources that they want. And again, we talked about how this stuff, if it's self-funding, it's going to be resistant to being chopped when the economy gets tight. So here are 4 of my favorite drivers of change: stopping limiting assumptions, embracing abundance, working backward from your goal, and being creative. We'll look at these one at a time. So when my house was built in 1743, the limiting assumption was that a human being cannot go faster than a horse could take them. This is the International Space Station. This cruises by at 17,500 miles an hour. That is a heck of a lot faster than a horse. I love this quote from Muhammad Ali so much that I actually built my TEDx talk around it. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration, it's a dare. So we do impossible things all the time. You remember those slides I showed at the beginning of people who've changed the world with kindness. Rosa Parks was an ordinary person. She was a seamstress. How much more ordinary can you get? Lech Walesa, before he was president of Poland and before he was an organizer with Solidarity, was an electrician working in a shipyard. Martin Luther King Jr. was a brand new pastor at a small church in Montgomery, Alabama. Nelson Mandela was serving a life sentence for what we would call in this country sedition. He was probably not an appropriate sentence in the first place because he was just an activist organizing like I'm an activist organizing. But that was the justice system in South Africa, is that he was in prison for life until he wasn't, until he was released and became South Africa's first freely elected president. Mother Teresa was a nun working in Calcutta. These were ordinary people who saw opportunities to be great. They weren't born great, but the door opened and they walked through. So here are 4 questions to ask and how you can build the changes in. First, if it has failed before, what happened that it didn't work? What's different now? What else might need to change before you do it? You'll see in this particular picture about half the people are wearing masks. That is something that changed only since last March. And it was a little shocking to me that they're so closely gathered in this picture in a demonstration during the pandemic. So that's another thing into what else needs to change in this picture. They should have been further apart. But the picture is better because they weren't. And then how do you get all of the stakeholders to buy in to the change process? And that would mean in a company, it might mean your employees, your customers, your vendors, your suppliers, the government regulators who you work with, and many other constituencies potentially as well. So the more you can do win, 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 the better it works. So abundance. Abundance, I believe in an abundance world. I believe that there is enough to go around. I believe we have serious kinks in the distribution, but that there is enough. And I got into this, interestingly enough, through the frugality movement. I was writing books about frugality in the 90s. One was, well, the frugal book for the consumer market was called The Penny Pinching Hedonist. And it was about how to have fun cheaply. And that book really started thinking that I'm a person who has a lot of fun in my life, and I can afford to do it because I know how to do it very inexpensively. And that money is really a means to an end. It's not the end. Money is what you buy to get toward the end. So this model of the corn comes from my friend John Kramer, who wrote a book called 1001 Ways to Market Your Book. He lives in New Mexico, very smart guy, and he has a concept called biological marketing. And it's basically exponential growth. You plant one kernel of corn, and it makes a stalk with 20 ears of corn, and each of those ears might have 500 or 1,000 kernels. It's a very different model from the linear growth model. I believe also that conservation is a way of increasing abundance. So you see this big straight pipe there above the text. When Interface, which is a well-known and very, very environmentally friendly carpet and flooring company, changed one of their procedures in one of their plants from narrow curvy pipes to big straight wide ones like these, they were able to save 92% of the energy in that process. They got rid of a bunch of valves. They didn't have to push so hard to get things through the pipes. It just went. Much less friction. 92%. Who would have thunk it? On abundance, we can look at food waste, which is a horrible thing. 30 to 40% of all the food in the United States never gets eaten. And most of it doesn't even get composted. We're throwing away 1.3 billion tons of food a year. If we were to figure out uses for that before it went bad, we could recover 1.4 billion hectares of land. Now, a hectare is like 2.5 acres, so that's a lot of land. It's actually 28% of the land that's devoted to agriculture. So when people say there's not enough room to grow all the crops we need, this is what you tell them. Solve that 28% that's being wasted. You would not be generating almost 3.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide. You'd be saving literally as much water as goes through the Volga River, not to mention $750 billion. Not a bad return on the investment of turning trash into something useful. Let's look at something as simple as brushing your teeth. Now, some of you live in arid climates, and you probably know this already, but here in New England, people are very profligate with water. And the typical way that people are taught to brush their teeth is you turn your faucet on full, you wet your toothbrush, you brush for the 3 minutes, you rinse your toothbrush, and then you turn off the faucet. No. You've just wasted, 5-10 gallons of water for no purpose. And even though in the Northeast you may have enough water, that doesn't mean we should be profligate with it. So turn on a small trickle of water, wet your toothbrush, turn it off, add the toothpaste brush, turn on another small trickle of water to rinse the toothbrush, and you've used teaspoons instead of gallons. And think of what would that do in terms of, just as an example, a community like Flint, Michigan, where the water was poisoned by very poor practices of that local government. They're bringing in bottled water. So, if the bottled water is being used appropriately in a situation like that where you can't drink the other water, it's easier to get that bottled water if the aquifer isn't being depleted by millions of people brushing their teeth with the water full force for 3 minutes. So if you take nothing away from this, I hope you'll take away how to brush your teeth in a more eco-friendly way. And that, of course, can apply to how you wash a dish and everything else. So this is a quote from a man named John Todd. Nature's intelligence can reduce negative human impact by 90%. John Todd is a consultant with a company called Ocean Arcs International. He's been in this area for decades. I remember his stuff in the 1970s. He does things like develop what he calls restorers, which is a natural system of plants that cleans specific pollutants. And he might have a restorer that has 28,000 different plants engineered to remove some terrible heavy metal from the water. And when you use nature's intelligence, it is called biomimicry. And that is one of the things that really impresses me in my research, is that we can learn, for example, how to build bridges by looking at how a spider builds a web. We can learn how to conserve water by looking at the Namib desert beetle. We can learn all sorts of things from all sorts of creatures. We can learn how to manage a climate that switches back and forth between extreme flooding and extreme aridity, like the monsoon climate of India. And we can look at how nature has evolved with swales and gullies that move the water runoff to the places where it's needed and manage to conserve enough of it so that even during the dry periods, the plants don't die. The best thing, by the way, on biomimicry that I'm aware of is a TED Talk by Janine Benyus, Janine, like Nancy, Yus. And I'm just going to write myself notes to what I want to put on the chat. Okay, so I can remember to do that after I exit the slides. Okay, now, okay, so working backward from the goal. Here are two great examples. Thomas Edison was asked, how did it feel to fail 10,000 times before you invented the light bulb? And he said, I didn't fail. I invented a light bulb. It happened to be a 10,000 step process. Not enough of us have that kind of attitude. Steve Jobs didn't say, build me a better Walkman. He said, give me a way of putting 1,000 songs in a pocket, and wasn't really worried about how the engineers would figure out how to do that. That wasn't his job. That was theirs. They came up, of course, with the iPod. Okay, kindness to a neighborhood and a mountain. This photo was taken actually from my yard, looking at Barstow's Longview Farm, and behind it, Skinner State Park, also known as Mount Holyoke. This is a very famous park. On top of it, there's an old hotel from the 1850s and a view of 4 states. It's a little mountain. It's only 942 feet at the summit, I think. So 300 meters for those of you who think metric. And the mountain next to this, a developer said, oh, I've got a plan. I'm going to build 40 big luxury houses going all the way up to the summit, ruining the view from the state park, ruining my neighborhood with extra traffic and environmental issues, a long list of environmental issues. And when he announced it, within days, I announced the first meeting of Save the Mountain. And I sent out a press release and I flyered the neighborhood. And what we got back from the experts was, oh, this is a terrible project, but there's nothing we can do to stop it. And it was actually hearing those people quoted in the newspaper story that announced this horrible project that got me motivated to say, yes, we can. Yes, we will. So I started a movement. The first meeting, I was expecting that we'd have about 20 people and we'd get 5 seriously involved, and we would make the developer's life annoyed for about 5 years, and eventually we'd win. Well, 70 people showed up at the meeting. 35 got involved in the core. We got more than 70 news stories in print media and about a dozen in TV and radio. We got support from people in 3 counties, and we got coverage as far away as Boston, which is 100 miles away. The Globe did an article on us. And we won in 13 months flat, 1 year plus 1 month. And we won near total victory. Interestingly enough, before we won, we had already won 3/4 of the way, because the 40 houses were going to be 32, and then they were going to be 12. And then we won, and we let them build 2 at the bottom, which is what I had said privately all along, that land should support. So forget about impossible. There's nothing we can do. There's always something you can do. You don't always win, but you have to try. You do not win if you don't try. This is kindness on so many levels. This is a product by a company called D-Light. They're one of many companies that do solar LED lamps. Their particular focus is very much on social entrepreneurship, on seeing their product as ladder out of poverty for multiple people. Now, this is typically deployed in places that have been using kerosene. You may not know about kerosene lamps, but let me tell you a little bit about them. First of all, they're toxic. They emit fumes that are not good to breathe. Second, there's a fire risk, a big fire risk. Thousands of people get killed or injured in kerosene fires. Third, it's fossil fuel powered, and we all know that we have to be moving away from that. And fourth, of course, for a very poor family in some village somewhere, if they're paying $2 a month for kerosene, that could be 10% of their disposable income that they can't use for anything else. So when you get rid of all that and put in these safe, clean lamps that have better light, and you sell them to people on a time payment where they take what they used to pay for kerosene and they pay the lamp off every month for 10 or 20 months, and then it's done and it's free and clear, and that money goes into their real disposable income. and you create jobs on the ground for people who are selling and servicing. You've created a ladder out of poverty for the family using the lamp, that maybe the parents can see well enough to do a little craft business on the side at the end of the day working in agriculture. Maybe the kids can, as these kids are doing, see well enough to get better grades on their homework and eventually better jobs. And so you've got this family that is buying the lamp benefiting. You also got the family of the person selling the lamp, and the people making the lamp, which I believe they do primarily in local factories. They're not making these in California and shipping them around the world. So you've created multiple ladders out of poverty from one little cheap product. So here are two principles to keep in mind as you're designing your social enterprise, environmental enterprise. One is that when you market with messages that combine self-interest for the consumer and a global purpose, people are very receptive to that. And the other is when you do your operations in keeping with that principle, you not only hit both marketing points, but you also are, once again, you're putting yourself in that category where you're recession-proof. Nobody's going to be calling to get rid of you, of your program, when things get sour, because yours is going to be making money. So there are opportunities, many opportunities for creating a kind business. Obviously, eco-friendly is very trendy right now, but even if it weren't trendy, it's the right thing to do. It's kind to the world. It's kind to the people of the world and the animals and the plants. And the world, I believe, by the way, will survive regardless of whether humans do, but it would be kind of nice if we survived as well. So here are 5 different sectors where there are opportunities. And these, I'm going to highlight 2 of them in a minute. And there are also, within those sectors, each one of those, you could take, here are 4 different ways that you can come in as a solution provider: training people, design, building and installing, and of course, sales. And as the king of Siam would have said, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the areas I'll focus on here is food. We have a hunger problem, as we know, and we have a problem with food distribution and food waste, as we saw earlier. So in getting a food business going that helps people and helps the planet, first of all, it supports your local regenerative farmers. It decarbonizes. It creates jobs and profits. And this is really important. Agriculture done the right way actually lowers carbon, cools the earth, regreens the planet, adds oxygen. And because wars are really about resources, when you address these issues, you are getting rid of future wars. Resource conflicts go at least as far back as the Old Testament. You see in there people talking about water issues or food issues or land issues. So by using our resources efficiently and by replacing what I call chemiculture, conventional agriculture, which is very destructive, makes a carbon mess. Monocropping is very open to disease, a lot of problems with that. But let's just say you set up a farm that grew all the raw ingredients here. So there's soybeans, there's spinach, there's buckwheat, there's looks like sweet potatoes. I don't remember what we cooked for dinner that night. I took the slide a long time ago. But you could grow all those things on one farm instead of monocropping. You could do it organically. You could do it in ways that benefit the local economy. You can employ local people. A lot of good stuff comes out. And the other area that I'll focus on is construction, and particularly green construction. And interestingly enough, pretty much anywhere you live, there is some technology that is going to be appropriate for taking you off carbon fuels or nuclear fuels. So I live in this house built in 1743 on this working dairy farm. And I heat my house with cow poop and food waste that the farm, my neighbors, generate. They take the cow poop and restaurants bring in truckloads of waste, and they generate a huge amount of electricity that they send out over the grid, and they generate enough heat to heat 8 houses on the farm, including mine. So I get my heat and hot water from that. You'll notice a number of parallels in the text points I have here with the text points on food. I'll just bring back so you can compare them. They're very, very synergistic. So this is the food, and this is the energy and building. And I will say that we have the technologies. We know how to fix these problems. We really do. It's just a matter of deploying them, finding the willpower, getting rid of that, oh, we can't do anything kind of crap. So these are a couple of ways that going green creates kindness. We already talked a little bit about resource wars, and now I'm going to stop. No, I'm not going to stop sharing. I'm just going to stand up and show you the shirt I'm wearing. That says salam, that says shalom, and that says peace. Peace in 3 languages. And the Middle East, if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere. There are a number of initiatives of people working together. One I particularly like is called Neve Shalom in Hebrew and Wahada Salam in Arabic. And it's a peace community where families are raising children who go to school together. In Israel is a very segregated country. Some people have called it apartheid. So this is a revolutionary thing to have Jewish and Arab kids learning together. And that, I believe, is another way that you stop having wars. So when you go green, you save the cost of fuel, you get rid of the pollution, and you get rid of a lot of the resource conflict. And we're seeing more and more very creative solutions. Like many people think of the large concentrated energy systems that we've all seen pictures of. But you don't have to have a solar field with 5,000 panels. You can have 3 on your house. Or you don't need to build a huge hydroelectric dam across a big river and flood a whole farming valley. You can put in a Frisbee-sized turbine that doesn't dam anything but catches the power of the wind of the water as it goes by. Similarly with wind, that we have all of these technologies. Geothermal, they can be sized for a single deployment and not necessarily a huge mega energy production. And incidentally, when we do those mega energy productions, we lose an awful lot of energy to friction, moving the power around. Much better to generate it near where you're going to use it. So here's a building I imagine all of you will recognize on 34th Street and 5th Avenue in New York City, the Empire State Building. Now that building was built in the early 1930s. Oil and gas were practically free. They were a few cents, not a gallon, but a barrel. So needless to say, this building was built to impress with the power of American might and ingenuity. At the time, the tallest building in the world. It was not built with conservation in mind. But several years ago, the Rocky Mountain Institute, Johnson Controls, and several other organizations and companies got together in this consortium to retrofit this building. They actually took 1 floor of it and made it a window factory. So they were making new windows on site, or I guess refurbishing the existing windows. So they spent, it wasn't cheap, okay? They spent $13 million to do this retrofit, but every year they're saving $4.4 million, which was 40% of the energy the building was using. And that means that after 3 years, they had paid back that $13 million investment. And then we talked about the $2 in surplus capital that the people with the solar lamp might have. They had $4.4 million extra dollars to play with every year. Okay, the man who lived in this home, I'm not sure if he still does, is Amory Lovins, founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute. This house is in a suburb of Aspen, Colorado. Aspen, if you recall, is cold enough that its main industry is skiing. Now, Amory Lovins was one of the people involved in that Empire State Building retrofit, and one of the reasons they hired him probably was because he's done projects like this. This was his own house. In 1984, building a house that was essentially net zero. When I heard him speak some years ago, he said his electric bill was $5 a month. Now, this is a 4,000 square foot house. It doesn't have a furnace or air conditioner because it doesn't need one. It's comfortable inside because it's super insulated and it's got all that glass for the summer. And I believe there's a way of cutting out some of the light in the summer. Sorry, did I say glass letting the heat for the winter is what I meant to say. And he's actually growing bananas in the sunroom. Aspen, Colorado. How many bananas do you grow in Aspen, Colorado? Snow capital of the mountain states. And the cost of the additional improvements to make all this possible had a 10-month payback. So why haven't we been doing this all along? We would have made huge progress on carbon and pollution. We've had freed up so much money for renewables that probably the entire economy would be renewable based by now. Goodbye fossil, goodbye nuclear. Here's another one of those virtuous circles. This is an intentional industrial community in Vermont called the Intervale. So there's a brewery. The brewery processes grains to make beer. And then after that, there's these leftover grain mush that they grow mushrooms on. When it's done growing mushrooms, it makes very good food for a tilapia crop, which in turn, their manure, do you call it manure when it's fish? Their excreted waste becomes an input for growing greens and herbs, which in turn is feeding the grain for the brewery. Meanwhile, they're capturing the heavy metals and pollutants out from the system, reselling them, and they're capturing the waste heat. So when we think holistically like this, this is what we can accomplish. And we have lots and lots of examples in the green world. Now, our challenge in the next 10 years or so, I think, is to find those examples in terms of addressing hunger, poverty, racism, catastrophic climate change, and all the rest of it. Now, let's talk for a minute about our own power as consumers. We can support movements, we can support companies that are doing the right thing, and we can spread the word through our own networks, which it used to be the old adage in marketing was somebody who loves you tells 3 people and somebody who hates you tells 10. Well, now add a few zeros on the end of that. We all have social media accounts. We all have access to the world. So the facts bear this out, that consumers make a difference. When you've got 76% of consumers willing to choose a different brand because it's more socially responsible, when you've got those enormous amounts on the bottom left in the pockets of communities that have been considered economically marginal, and when you realize that almost everybody would really rather buy a green and socially conscious product, there's tremendous power there. So don't accept, oh, we can't do this, it's too hard, because we can. So on this website, and again, I'll put up a slide that tells you how to get the slides very shortly. Goingbeyondsustainability.com/freebies, you'll see the assessment that you can get. If you fill that out, I will give a 15-minute consultation on how to incorporate social enterprise into your organization to anybody. But if you fill out the assessment, for you, you get a half an hour. That's enough time to do some serious brainstorming. There are plenty of other gifts on that page as well. This is my latest book, Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World. The front cover has a quote from Chicken Soup's Jack Canfield, and the back cover has Seth Godin. And inside are endorsements from people like Joel McCower, who founded greenbiz.com, Alicia Bay Laurel, who wrote Living on the Earth back in the 70s, and actually guest essays from people including Frances Moore LePay, author of Diet for a Small Planet, and a whole bunch of books about democracy, as well as Cynthia Kersey, author of Unstoppable. So I think it's a really good book. I am thinking about doing another piece of writing about the opportunities in COVID, but I haven't actually written it yet. So right now, this is the most recent. Ivan's laughing at me. And these are some of the ways, when you have that 30 minutes with me, these are some of the things we might look at, how you can do these things, how you can create and market profitable and impactful services and products that address these things, how you can market both to green and non-green, conscious and selfish markets, and you can't do it the same way. You have to have different sets of marketing, how you can green your operation, and who you can partner with. Here I'm partnering with Mari-Lyn to bring you this information, and so are all the other presenters. that's only one of many kinds of partnerships. I had a client actually who wanted to partner with Coca-Cola about bringing her solar lamps, and she's not the person I profiled in that slide about the solar lamps, but she was a client with a different kind of solar lamp. She wanted to bring them into Puerto Rico to address the hurricane a few years ago, and she wanted Coca-Cola to help them, and I wrote her something about why it would be to their benefit to do so. So there's all sorts of opportunities out there. My question to you is, how will your business change the world? And my encouragement to get started with it, don't wait. And then once again, here's my contact information, and I will open the floor